It was a friend of mine who said, have you ever thought about the priesthood? My father was a non-practicing Catholic. My mother was a practicing Catholic. And I would summarize their whole reaction into one phrase, over my dead body. In 1970, there was nearly 60,000 priests in the United States. And in 2021, there were 35,000. So if there's a decline in the number of priests, then there's decline in the number of times and places where the Eucharist can be offered.
There's a decline in marriages. There's a decline in amount of children per family. And there's certainly a decline in people who go to Mass.
Here's the crisis in the world. The crisis is being Christ-less. How's Christ going to continue in the world? By his holy priesthood.
People's hearts and souls will be on the line. Somebody has to step up, and God has asked me to do it.
What are we living for? Where are we going?
It seems like it's the most difficult thing is to surrender my life to God, but it's the easiest thing because at the end of the day, he doesn't need every single part of it. He just wants our heart.
I wanted to become a priest because of the experience that he has given me of being desired by him who's perfect, me who's imperfect.
The question for me, as was the question that Jesus, reflects upon in the gospel in relationship to the man who accumulates all this wealth, and God says, you fool, tonight your life will be demanded of you. So I asked the question of my congregation, I asked the question of myself, what is it that you want to hear from God at the end of your life? Well done, good and faithful servant, or you fool?
So here we are. Welcome to A Reason for Hope Candid. And this podcast is actually going to be a little bit different for us because I'm in the candid crew, which is very unusual.
Yes.
Usually I'm not very candid, but I'm going to be candid today.
Looking forward to it.
So I'm looking forward to it too. I'm excited to hear what I have to say about this candid thing. So this is kind of cool. I'm equally more excited about the subject that we're going to be talking about, which is actually vocation. Array of Hope embarked on doing this film, Vocation, about a year and a half ago. And I've been doing sort of like a speaking tour or an interview tour over the past few months. And it just dawned on me that we should be talking about vocation here on our podcast, which is why we're doing this today. And I wanted to share with the listeners really how this idea came about. And I think it started with one of our team members, Jack Garno, was approached by his pastor, Father Richard Carton, right?
Yep.
And he had said to Jack, hey, have you guys ever thought about doing a film or a documentary on vocation? And Jack brought it to our team, and then we shared it with you, Ryan. By the way, we're here with Father Steve Delia and Ryan Devir, who is the director and producer of the project. And so we're talking about how it started, and when we brought it up to the team, we all thought it was a good idea, right? And what was your initial thought, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those ideas that started very small, and then the more involved and the more we talked about it, just kind of grew into a bigger project. I mean, initially it was kind of Father Richard saying, we got this great kid who's becoming a priest. I really would love to highlight him and his family's relationship and their outlook on him discerning the priesthood, because I think there's a need for families to not be afraid of their sons wanting to join the priesthood. There's a little bit of a stigma. I think when I met your family, your mom even told a story of a woman in their parish whose young son was an altar server, and the priest said, I think he'd make a great priest, and the mom just kind of jokingly was like, oh, God forbid.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it. And that's kind of the sentiment. It's sort of like, oh no, like it's almost like sending your child off to war in a way.
Make
like
someone
I'm
else
losing.
do it.
Yeah, like no, that's fine for somebody else. But if you no, I want my son to be normal, and I want them to be happy and have children, and so that was kind of the idea of sitting down with your family and interviewing them and getting their perspective. But again, the more we talked about it, the more we thought maybe we should interview a few more priests and get some different perspectives, and it grew from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, it started out with the sort of simple idea, and then it evolved into interviewing priests that are currently priests today. And then we also interviewed men who discerned out of priesthood, or rather seminary, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you say that, Father?
Yeah, discerned out of seminary would be.
And it was really interesting how the whole sort of narrative evolved. So, Ryan, I wanted to ask you before we get to Father, what was it that struck you in putting this film together, which really took about a year, right? I mean, were there anything that surprised you in the information that you learned? Anything that struck you in a way that, wow, I never really thought about that, or I never really perceived seminary to be like that? Anything that struck you?
Yeah, I think I think I was kind of in that category too of, oh, the priesthood is nice for somebody else. And Mike Rose, who's in the film, who's has his testimony is discerning out of seminary, had a great line of saying, that guy wants to be a priest. That's awesome. He's called to holiness. I'm not. I'm kind of called to just kind of figuring it out over here, and I don't have to be that holy. So through the film, finding out that that's not true, and finding out that being a father, you're a domestic priest, and a priest of the home. And I think even Father Mike Jolie says in the film, every baptized person is a priest. So you kind of think, you live your life kind of thinking that priests are an arm's length away, and almost like they're these super holy, otherworldly people that you can't even talk to as a normal person. They're sort of like, you go to them for confession, and then maybe you kind of, you avoid them outside of there. But they're just men. They're they have the same call to holiness that everyone else has, and they're trying the best they can too. And nobody's perfect, and we're all just trying. We're all falling short of the glory of God, but we're all kind of called to do the same thing. So when the playing field was evened out in that way, it was a little shocking to find out that, oh man, I have to do the same thing as Father Steve.
You don't have an excuse anymore.
I'm in trouble. So that was kind of cool to find out.
Well, Father, I want to ask you questions. Before I ask you questions about actually participating in the film, what was your impression about seeing it first time? Were you surprised? Did you think it was going to be something else? Because I know when you're part of something, you're only sort of experiencing what you contributed, right? Yeah. But now seeing it cumulatively as a piece of work, what struck you initially? Like, did we hit the nail on the head? Did we share what is important for men that might be discerning or hearing a calling? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I knew that there were a lot more elements that had come in, so I was expecting that, but I was surprised at how well they were very well sutured together, but also that there was this narrative that the film had that went through. Basically, it seems like Father Richard's conversation was a great backbone for the film to then go into different aspects of the other interviews, which I thought was just a very competent way to do it. I thought that was awesome. Yeah.
If the Steve Delia saw this before you heard a calling, what would your impression be? Would you maybe you had inklings of the priesthood, but you really weren't sure, but then you saw this film? Would that have encouraged you or discouraged you, or made you think about it more distinctly about maybe I do have a calling?
Yeah, I think it certainly would be encouraging. I think the film addresses two of the kind of main categories of obstacles that could be there for a young man considering priesthood. I think the first would be, will I be happy, right? Can this fulfill me, right? And obviously that's the wrong question, right? Our question should always be, am I good enough to serve God, right? But I think it addresses a lot of those questions of the struggles that a lot of guys discerning go through in the process of figuring out, like, what does this mean for me? That I'm diverging from the path that most men follow in their lives in becoming fathers, family members, husbands, and workers out in the workforce. So I think that's addressed, right? But I think the other thing that's often missing in young men's hearts and minds is seeing just how epic the priesthood is, and having kind of a warrior's outlook on the priesthood, and seeing it, we really have to recover the masculinity of the priesthood, and how incredibly masculine it truly is, that the priest is really a soldier for Christ, a general on the battlefield, leading Christ's faithful into spiritual battle, right? And I think that's captured as well in the film, which I thought was phenomenal.
So Ryan, I know that you edit a lot of stuff here at Array of Hope, and sometimes you don't know what you got until you start editing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you started to see the narrative unfold with all these different characters, did it excite you? Did it feel like, oh, this is kind of interesting? It's kind of moving in were you surprised? Were you like, oh, this is moving in a direction I'd never anticipated? And what was the sentiment or the emotion behind that sort of surprise or the way it was developing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you film anything, you plan and you script things out and you hope to build some sort of narrative, and then you go film it, and then it's just a great feeling to then bring everything back into the studio and start cutting it up and seeing that to a degree it worked. And you're like, okay, great, we didn't just waste everybody's time. There's that pressure of feeling like, oh gosh, I hope we can. Sometimes you're like, I hope we can chisel something out of this. But yeah, I mean, you go in with that. It seems like it's working. And the more you start chipping away at it, sometimes other things are revealed that can shift it entirely in a different direction or solve problems. Problems arise, and then you keep going, and then you find the solve in someone's testimony. They're like, okay, great, this goes here. And for it to not feel like a Frankenstein cut, for it to actually solve the problem and bridge these gaps was pretty great. And having various perspectives just made it easier the more I started editing it together. And then having great feedback from the Array of Hope team, from our audio engineer that assisted on the project as well. There were just a lot of different eyes that contributed to what you see today. So it's truly a team effort. Yeah.
One of the things that was discussed in the film is the reality that statistically in 1970, I beg your pardon, there were 60,000 priests, right? In 2021, there were 35,000 priests. So there's a serious decline in the priesthood. And also we talked about the crisis and the confusion that's going on within the Catholic Church. So there's a lot of discouraging factors that men are faced in discerning about the priesthood. And then we even talked about even the people that you love, your family, your friends will discourage you and say, well, why do you want to do that? And we kind of addressed that in the film. So I want to ask you, how did that affect you when you were getting that bombardment of many different areas that were discouraging you to moving forward in the priesthood? What was it that kept you moving forward in the priesthood? Or were there portions of your timeline toward this priesthood that you stalled and then regrouped and heard the calling even stronger? What does that feel like?
Yeah, certainly. I think there are always going to be negative voices, and we hear them, and we try not to let them discourage us. But there are also positive voices too throughout. And I think there were so many people in my life that were also supportive. In some people's cases, it's different. Like Father Richard's parents didn't support him, and that's the hardest, right? But I think there's always going to be people in our lives that support us in that. But I think the most important thing is that we know what we're about. We know who we are. We know what Christ asks of us, because ultimately it's his approval that we want. And of course, it's his approval that we'll get, of course, because he loves us and he desires to make us the perfect image of himself that we can be. Right? And so that's what we need to be about our Father's business. We, our Blessed Mother and Saint Joseph found Jesus in the temple, and even they were concerned, and they said, "Why, son, why have you done this to me?" And he says, "Don't you know that I had to be in my Father's house?" Right? And so that identity, that unity with the Father, I think is critical because that's what's going to matter when it's hard, when we're discouraged, when maybe we've been abandoned by all. That happens to many of the saints, and it can happen to us. And certainly we can have feelings of being abandoned by all, even if we're not. But nonetheless, that we know what we're about, we know who we are, and we know why we're doing it. We're doing it for God. We're not doing it for them. Well, we are doing it for them, but for God's, for God's mission. But we're not doing it for their affirmation, right? And that's always the challenge, I think, with any ministry, but very much with the priesthood is we need to know why we're doing it. And we're doing it first and foremost to please God, and through that we sanctify the world.
Why do you think a film like this is important, especially today, in reaching young men and helping them? I guess we're helping them discern, or we're hoping that we're planting seeds of grace in their heart so they hear that calling with a little bit more clarity. Maybe we're hoping that this film could add some sort of encouragement and persuasion that, yeah, maybe I do hear that call and go to the next step, which is important.
I think today more than ever, it's not in the minds of young men. They would never think of it, right? And I think, to use it as an example, women religious is even farther, right? Because we don't see them, and especially we don't see young ones out as much. Now, there's different young orders that are growing, and thank God that they're coming back, and that's amazing. There's some orders that are really exploding throughout the world, and all of them are super young, and they're passionate, they're vibrant, they love the Lord, which is amazing. But so too in the priesthood, we have less young priests than we used to. Yeah, we have to admit that. Now, I went to seminary with a bunch of young priests, so the way I see it is, oh no, there's young priests all over. But
right.
But the reality is we're spread thin, right? So, I mean, per capita, there are not a lot of young priests. And so for a young man looking to follow the Lord's will in his life, to see in that film that it is a legitimate option, and I could be one, right? Because I see men like me that are similar to my, it's not just a thing old guys do. No, this is a thing that God calls young men to,
right?
First and foremost, right?
Yeah, right.
And so that makes it a legitimate option when they start to consider that.
And I think you even say in the film, you kind of let the audience know that you join seminary, you don't have to become a priest. It's not like, you're climbing up to 14,000 feet and the door opens and you got to jump because that's the rules for the parachute place and you're getting pushed towards the door. You say people leave all the time, that you could leave a day after, 2 years after, 3 years after.
Or the day before.
The day before.
And guys did that.
Yeah. And so to know that it's, it's something almost in a sense, I don't want to get into hyperbole here, but it's something that like every man should consider going to seminary just to kind of
absolutely,
lack of a better word, like rule it out, and to kind of involve yourself in stillness and silence.
Yeah,
because it's really, really difficult to do that these days.
And actually going into seminary, when I started at Seton Hall, at St. Andrew's Hall, which is the college seminary at Seton Hall, the rector, when I had my meeting with him, he said something to me that really encapsulated how the church sees seminary formation, that either way it's a win for the church. We get a good priest, a holy priest, or a holy father. And so nothing is lost. The church doesn't regret that time that man has spent in seminary. He has learned so much about the faith, so much about the spiritual life, right? And had an opportunity, like you said, to grow in holiness, have the time to sit in silence. I mean, as a young father yourself, Ryan, I'm sure you know, it's like you don't get a lot of time quiet and to pray alone. But that's something that's afforded. It's an opportunity that's afforded in seminary, which I think is critical for any man who's in formation. And I think too, I've heard people say as well that, yeah, when you date a girl and then you say, actually, I'm called to be a priest, then you break two hearts, right? When you discern the priesthood and then leave, nobody's heart is broken, right? And then end up getting married, right? So I think in a way, the first thing should always be, am I called to a celibate vocation? Because that's really hard. Now, maybe hearts aren't always broken, but it's nonetheless a very difficult situation. I know friends that have gotten engaged or close to being engaged and then said, the Lord's calling me to a different kind of vocation. He's calling me to celibacy. and that's difficult no matter what. And so, yeah, I think every man should contemplate it at least as a legitimate option for himself.
And that was another podcast we did, right?
Yeah, dumped for the seminary. Yeah. We got Jimmy, Alanis, and Jack talking about that in depth. A lot of broken hearts out there.
Yeah.
A lot of broken hearts.
At least what I'm experiencing, through a ray of hope is I think the young priests that are being ordained today are really on fire. I mean,
I see that
given
as well.
all the obstacles and all the things that are going on in the church, that they're making a commitment and they understand that commitment, or else they wouldn't be making it.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, there's a lot of discouragement, I think more so than ever,
Yeah.
I mean, years ago, and not to interrupt you, like when I was a kid, I remember like being a priest was a big deal. Like if you became a priest, it was very honorable. Not that it isn't today. I'm just saying the perspective, the viewpoint, the cultural viewpoint was like, oh, he's becoming a priest.
The prestige is gone.
The prestige, yeah. And which is unfortunate. But to my point is that the men that are becoming priests today are really, and you're
doing
included
it for the right
in that.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, you're in the right, exactly. You're in there for the right reasons.
There's nothing there. That's why people would give us, clericalism was an issue in the past, right? And we'd get talks from our seminary formators or from our teachers at the university and be like, don't be clerical, like love your people. And listen, lady, there's no prestige left. I mean, obviously we get the love of the Catholic faithful, and that is worth more than its weight in gold.
Right.
But there's very little social status. I go to the supermarket and you'd be surprised at how often people call me buddy. Like they don't even know what a priest is or what to call him, and it's out of no sense of malice or anything. People just don't know. It's not in the public mind anymore. So yeah, you're right. I mean, all that's left is to serve the Lord, which I think is a good place to be.
Yeah.
Poverty's always been lucrative for the economy of salvation.
I guess, Ryan, I want to ask both of you the same question. Is there a part in the film that is your favorite part that you really like?
Like Buddy was saying, I like
Father Buddy to you.
Father Buddy. It's tough. There's a bunch of sections in the film that are great. It's hard to think of one part, and I hate to choose a section that Father Steve is not in. It just comes to mind.
I won't hold it against you.
When Father Mike Jolie says that I believe he says, to an eternal God, does a 50-year-old parent or a 60-year-old parent look any different than a 10-year-old kid or a 5-year-old kid? And to kind of have that perspective is interesting because it sounds so simple and it sounds so silly, but you kind of do feel like, you get older and then God kind of forgets about you, and he's got to focus on the younger kids and stuff like that. And you're a parent now, or you're an adult, so you're good. You figure out your thing. It's almost kind of like even now when I watch professional football, I always think they're like 45 because like growing up, my dad would watch football. So I, in my head, I'd be like, why would he not watch? He would probably watch people his age because you're so focused on grades and ages and stuff. So it made no sense that my dad would be watching, 20-year-olds play football. So even now I'm like, man, this guy must be so old and he's 19. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I know.
It's so weird.
I'm older than this kid.
But when you think about that, it's you kind of, it doesn't matter how old you are. There's no difference. You're just as important and you're just as valuable to God. So that was a pretty powerful line that I think that we did a great job enhancing visually and with music and whatnot. I like that part. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
I mean, I'm a little bit of my bias coming in, but Father Richard's parts are just, I mean, he
nails it.
Yeah. He just kills it. Especially, I mean, the line at the end where he talks about the passage from the gospel. He says, who do you want when you go before the Lord? What do you want the Lord to say? Well done, my good and faithful servant, or you fool. I mean, that's pretty heavy. He's got the lines, but yeah, I mean, just seeing he's just incredible.
Yeah, the Irish accent helps too.
It gets heavier when he's talking to somebody that's Irish.
I bet. Yeah, I mean, there was also a line, little behind the scenes look here. There was a line that was actually cut of yours that was a pretty good line. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier. You say the bottom line stays the same, people are going to hell, and we need to do everything we can to stop that from happening. Which I know before we were talking about kind of reasons to join the priesthood, and I thought that was a really, really powerful line. Maybe in the director's cut, we'll put that in there. The extended.
Only for the elites.
Yeah. One of my other favorite parts of working on this was your shoot because
you're feeling super good that day.
I wasn't feeling too good, but we filmed for like probably 30 hours. But the reason was because the day we were filming your interview and your parents' interview, your parents were in the process of moving. So the entire house was either in boxes or outside of boxes and whatnot. So every time we were setting up for a shot, we had to clear the entire room.
Yes.
Basically move all the stuff that your parents were planning on moving, bring it to the front of the house, and then dress it up. And then when we shot your thing, we had to bring everything back to the den where we shot your parents' interview, and then set up that to make it look like it was a different room. So if you watch the film, Steve's interview and his parents' interview were in the same house. Fun fact: we dressed up the front of their house to look like it was his very, nice, pious, very Padre Pio type room, just a wooden plank for a bed and
with nails on it.
Nails could measure like maybe a window. And then, so that was in the same house, and it was in the same day.
Just weeks before my parents were to move out.
Yes. And I think because it was such a long day, it incentivized them to just leave all of New Jersey.
Oh, you bet.
And go to Florida.
Yeah. And as I heard about the interview, I always joke with Ryan about this because I was told Father Richard Carton volunteered me for this. I was never asked if I wanted to. And
too late.
And so I just got a text from Jack Garno saying, "Hey, you're going to get a text from my friend Ryan, who works at the Ray of Hope with me." And Ryan then told me, "You are going to be interviewed. Let me know what day you want it to happen." And I thought, Ryan said he'd come to visit us. And so I figured, well, then that'll be great. I don't have to drive. It'll be just an hour out of my day. And then when I'm finding, he says, "Oh yeah, this date at 10 o'clock works. And you don't have anything planned in like the later evening, do you? Because it's going to take all day."
Wow. You don't realize how long shoots can take.
It makes sense.
With lighting
but it was
moving your parents out of their house and all that.
But it was an exciting ordeal to be a part of it. It was really, really cool to see all that happen and be a part of it. So I'm grateful.
You did awesome. It's a great job. My favorite part is when you see the men prostrate. Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. During the ceremony of the ordination, to me, I get emotional about it because I just view that as complete surrender, completely giving it all. And that is an emotional thing for me because I think it's super powerful and it's an amazing witness to see that. I've gone to a couple of ordinations, and whenever I see that, it always blows me away to see it in the film. And also what your mom shared, when she was, I'm paraphrasing where she kind of says, do you feel that you'll never be a grandparent or never have something like that, or never have kids? But she viewed it completely different. No, I'm going to have hundreds of people. My son is a father.
Oh yeah.
Was it something like that?
I'll have thousands of grandchildren.
Right. And that was just beautiful to have that perspective. Like it was a beautiful, encouraging sentiment.
And you see it when my parents, they come frequently to my masses, and they sit in the same spot every day. And when people find out that's my parents, all the parishioners always go up to them and like want to meet them. And so, no, I mean, they really partake in the life of the parish in a beautiful way. And speaking of the video footage of the ordination, for me watching it personally, it was really touching just seeing my ordination in video again, because I don't know if I just don't always think to look back to things like that, but looking back, it was really special just to see myself getting ordained and to remember what it was like on that day.
Yeah,
really
I feel like it'd be similar to getting married. The day just kind of flies by almost. There's so much on your mind that it's hard sometimes it's hard to be present.
Oh, totally.
When looking back on it. Yeah.
So but that's, and some people said, "Oh man, I'm so sorry I missed your ordination. I was sick. I was this, I was
Tell
away."
them to watch the movie.
And just watch the movie. Well, I say, it's like, don't worry. I'm celebrating
gonna
it
happen again.
for the rest of my life, So, and it's the same with marriage, right? You celebrate the sacrament of matrimony on that day, and then you celebrate the marriage for the rest of your life. It's not over. The best part has just begun. You're celebrating the beginning of something new, something beautiful, But that endures.
So Ryan, do you have any hope for the film? What is your
none?
It's hopeless.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I hope people watch it, continue to watch it. I mean, the response has been pretty great. Yeah, I just would love more and more people to watch it and share it, and to let us know what they think of it. And same thing. It's always fun to talk about movies and to say, oh, what was your favorite part of this? And it's always interesting to hear other people's perspectives, because they always catch something that you missed. Whether you've watched a movie 50 times or 1,000 times, there's always some person that's like, oh, I like this part. And you're like, I never even thought of that. I never noticed that. So of course. Yeah. Just like there's hope for the church, there's hope for this film, not equating the two.
But one shares in the goods of the other.
Yeah. No, the hope is, I hope it does a good job of supporting the priesthood and supporting the church in whatever way possible.
Yeah. How about yourself, Father? Is there a hope for the film for you?
Yeah, most certainly. I'm just recalling now, several years ago, I had seen some little trailer for Vocations that some diocese produced. And I said, oh, why can't we do something like that? And somebody said, no way, it's too big of a thing. It can't happen. And that just kind of faded out of my mind. And now I'm looking and there it is. I mean, bigger than that little video was that I saw and was jealous of. Now, this, and I'm proud that several, at least 2-3 priests from Patterson are in it. So in a way we can really make great use of that film to evangelize and bring the message of Vocations to the people of Patterson. So no, certainly I think there's hope.
Well, I mean, our hope here at Array of Hope is that we're trying to get national exposure on it. So we've been sharing it not just in the Diocese of Patterson, but every diocese that we can reach out to it.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people are seeing it. Any final notes that you want to add?
I mean, just continuing on that thought. I mean, just obviously want the film to inspire families and young men, and even young women in their discernment of their vocation. And just like you said, you saw a trailer for something years ago, then this comes out. It's always great to continue to inspire other filmmakers as well. Maybe they see something in it that they have a crazy budget and they want to take it to the next place. That can only help, future generations and a larger group of people. So that's what's awesome about, kind of indie film and whatnot is you can kind of, there's like a snowball effect. I'm just excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, my hope is that it's just going to reach the peripheries. It'll reach a young man who maybe thought about it when he was a kid, maybe never even shared it with anyone, because I feel that the film, I haven't seen many films on vocation, but I feel that it's very sort of guttural. Is that a word?
It's a word.
It's so like really raw in the sense that I think Ryan really pulled some really interesting truths out of the interviews that make it real. So we weren't really holding back any punches, which I think the culture today and young people appreciate that. So there's it doesn't look like we're trying to sell them anything.
Yeah.
Which is what I really like about the film. And when I've pitched it and talked to dioceses and I've talked to other interviews that I've been interviewed about the film, as I say, it's not like a sales film that we're trying to encourage men to go into the priesthood of vocation of the priesthood. It's more about just having someone investigate what they might be hearing in the infant stage. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Is that if you tap it to someone early on, then they might seriously investigate and talk to the vocation director or maybe talk to the parish pastor and say, I saw this film. What do you think? And then the process begins, right? I mean, that's how it works.
Yeah. And that's interesting you say that, because you point to something that's true, that it's about the good of the church. It's also about the good of the man. Because I was as I was towards the end of my discernment before I'd entered seminary, I went to talk to a man who's very instrumental in my formation, and just I looked up to greatly, and he was a lay celibate, and I knew that he had left his girlfriend when he was about to get engaged, and he loved her greatly and she loved him, but that was what God was calling him to. So I knew he knew that struggle of giving up. And I was struggling with I was like 95%, like, yeah, I should be a priest, but there was that 5%, like, what if I could be happy with a girl, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I went to him and he said, listen, at that time I was Stevie, listen,
you've had many names.
Man of many names. He says, you could get married and you could be really happy, and you could do great things. But if God's calling you to be a priest, you're never going to be as happy as you will be as a priest. You know, and there's men out there that God is calling to the priesthood, and we want them to have the opportunity to find their vocation, because that is going to make them happiest. That's not what they should ask, right? We shouldn't be seeking our own happiness. It's ultimately about giving of ourselves and serving the ministry of the church. But as it happens, it does make us happy to do God's will. As it turns out, God's plan is it's pretty good for us, you know. So I just thought that was that was good, what you said.
Yeah. Well, I want to encourage our viewers and listeners that the film is available on the Array of Hope channel. And one way you can easily find it is just type in Array of Hope, Google search it, and you'll see Array of Hope channel, click on it, and you'll be able to navigate to Vocation and find it pretty easily. Also, we're in discussions with streaming platforms, so hopefully by the time this podcast is released, it'll be in the show notes, so you can click on it and find it in multiple of other ways. Well, thanks for coming on, guys. Thanks, Ryan.
No problem.
For being here. It was a pleasure
having you.
Being in the
both.
candid world here, and I felt I was pretty candid.
I think so. Yeah.
I felt so. I was wearing my candid glasses.
Yeah, they're very cool.
You look super candid today.
Yeah. And thank you, Father Steve, for being with us and really saying yes to your vocation. And we love the priesthood here at Array of Hope. We pray for you guys every day. And go out and see the film.